So I'm from Oklahoma, and I went to college in Connecticut at a small liberal arts school called Wesleyan University. And during my last year of school, took this class on the political economy of developing countries, and that was when I heard about microfinance. This is way before Muhammad Yunus hadn't gotten the Nobel. I'm 30, so it was like, 9 years ago. And it was up and coming in terms of a domestic tool. So I went to Nicaragua and spent maybe 5 months doing it down there. It was really interesting. I was sick a lot, and so decided to come home. Really didn't want to, but I just couldn't stay well. So I came back, knew I wanted to keep exploring this thing that made a lot of sense, right? So using private business strategies to help low-income individuals, sustainable, innovative, exciting. So here I had this BA from a liberal arts school, didn't have an economics degree, didn't have a math degree, so I was sort of like, well, how can I get a job in microfinance? So I did a year of AmeriCorps Vista for Axion, Texas. So are you guys familiar with Axion? Some people are saying yes, some people are saying no. Okay, if you're not familiar with Axion, it was started in the 70s in Latin America, and it is one of the largest organizations doing microfinance work with the longest history. So you have the Grameen Bank out of Bangladesh, and around the same time you have the development of Axion. And their model's a little different in that a lot of times what they do is go into Latin America, get banks up and running, and then spin them off into freestanding banks that are owned by the borrowers. So a really famous one they have in Bolivia is called Banco Sol, for example. So they're a really good group, ACCION. They're worth checking out. So they decided to get into it domestically. And the largest, they had this umbrella, Axion, in the United States, and every organization, they had maybe 6 or 7 organizations that were each autonomous under that framework. So I went and worked for Axion, Texas, as opposed to Axion, New York, Axion, Santa Fe. There were a couple of different places. Texas was the largest one. It was the entire state, as opposed to New York, which was really a city. And was, at that time, the largest domestic microfinance lender in the country. So I did this year of AmeriCorps Vista, and was hired on after that for another year as a loan officer. And what was really interesting and a little bit frustrating to me, it all depends sort of what are your personal expectations. So I came out of school really interested in poverty alleviation. And I felt that domestic microfinance couldn't achieve that. Because if you're a nonprofit entity, even if you're not needing to make money for shareholders or something like that, you still are accountable to foundations, you still have to stay in business, so you have to make enough money that you're able to operate, because foundation money might go away, right? So nonprofit does not mean no profit. It just means the profits are being reinvested. So you do have pressures on you to perform, both financial and literally performance of your loans. As a result, and this is in no way to blame Axion, I'm not putting them down, and this is just my personal interpretation, I felt that often you had to kind of cream the borrowers, and you had to get the ones who really were closest to getting to that bankable position, but weren't quite there. And there's a huge service in providing that, no doubt. But I remember going to look at a borrower who ultimately did not become one of our borrowers. They had like a house bigger than my parents, and they had these 2 nice cars, and the bottom line was they just had so much debt that Chase Bank wasn't going to give them a loan. And it was sort of like, you know what, if you just got rid of your whatever, like your BMW, and you agreed to drive a Subaru, you might not need Axion. You might be able to go back into Chase Bank. And so for me personally, that wasn't the community that I wanted to be serving. Not that it's not a need, but it just wasn't where I wanted to be. That was one concern I had. Another concern, and I feel like this movie took a lot of the wind out of my sails because they hit on a lot of it, is that there's not an informal economy in America. At least in general, there's not an informal economy, right? So you look at microfinance. It's a tool that developed in the developing world, which is a horrible phrase, but whatever. And so if any of you have ever been to those countries, if you've been to Bolivia or Mexico, Nicaragua, whatever, you know that there's a lot of people who are just selling little wares off their blankets in the street, or they're selling you bags of milk or bags of juice, and they're not paying taxes, and it's not a registered business, and they don't need to produce profit and loss statements. They just need to make money and get home for the day and then do it again the next day. And that's not really how it works in the States. If you're, that's illegal. I mean, look at Giuliani in New York, right? One of the ways he cleaned up New York was to get rid of all the street vendors. And in the process, that was sort of like these small little informal economies. And maybe they were stolen watches, but that's what people were vending. So here, you have a business, you have to register it. You have to pay taxes on it. There's a lot that you have to go through that I certainly can't, articulate very well. So that's where I felt there was a little bit of a mismatch between the infrastructure of the United States and the design of microfinance. I think that's what I'll say about that. And then to the point about training, I thought was a really good one. So, you meet this guy and he comes to you for a loan and he wants to sell CDs in his CD shop. And the guy can tell you everything about music, and he's got great taste, and he's personable. That doesn't have anything to do with the ability to run a profitable music store. That doesn't have anything to do with knowing how much inventory to order, or when, or how you're going to pay your employees, and what you're going to need to bring in to keep things open, and how much should you be paying for that place you want to rent, and is that even the right location, or are people only going to come in if you're on a street that has more traffic? So there's a lot of assumptions that you make if you say, let's just give people loans. Small loans is the way to help people. There's a lot of people, and it's a great sentiment, and I probably sound like a cynic or a jerk for saying this. I can't believe these words are coming out of my mouth, but someone would probably kill me. There's, great beauty in saying everyone can be entrepreneurial. Probably everyone can be entrepreneurial, but does that mean everyone can be a successful entrepreneur? I think that's a different question. And I think that, especially in economies like this, where things are getting harder and harder, it's less clear what the answer is. What does it take to get someone to be a capable entrepreneur? I don't know. Probably a lot of training. And so that's why you will see in tandem loan programs that require technical assistance as part of it. So those were a couple of the things that I found challenging about domestic microfinance. Pause there and answer any questions. I can keep going. Yeah, Eric.
Well, was there anything from your experience, or maybe even since then, where you could say, well, if certain elements were tweaked or changed, it would better fit the economy and situation in the U.S.?
Hands down, I think that America feels pretty strongly that you should have a formal economy. I think, you need a babysitter. How many of us have baby staff in the neighbors? That's an example of an informal exchange here in the States. You don't have to go tell the U.S. government that you got $10 an hour for babysitting the neighbor's kids, But that's not really what America's going after. So in terms of infrastructure, we're probably not headed in that direction. But what they mentioned, and what I would recommend all of you educate yourselves about if you're interested in community development finance, is the CRA, which is the Community Reinvestment Act. And as this video said, banks are required to make loans to serve low and minority communities that otherwise maybe might be difficult for them to get into. So whenever a bank makes a loan, whenever banks establish, they have a footprint, sort of the area they're supposed to serve. And the CRA was designed to make sure that you weren't saying, okay, we need to serve these 3 miles in Chicago, let's serve the